All right, we're just waiting for a few more people and the all clear before we get started.
So Judge, as long as the jurors are all here, Sue says we have the go-ahead to start.
Fantastic, then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to be muted as much as I can because there's construction outside, but we can go ahead and call the case of United States versus Kara Bassett. My name is Judge Natalie Garson. If the scoring judges could go ahead and take a look at the two buttons on the lower left corner of your screen and make sure that your audio and video is turned off, and they'll stay off for the entire trial. And you should also have your video set to hide all of the non-video participants. So the only people that should be on your screen right now should be the advocates and myself. So we'll go ahead and get started if the attorneys would like to make appearances.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sam Farnsworth, and today I'll be representing the United States. May my co-counsel introduce herself?
You may.
Good afternoon. My name is Audrey Vanderslice.
Appearances from the defense, Your Honor.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Talia Vukotich, representing Ms. Kara Bassett. Assisting me throughout today's trial will be my second chair, Ms. Gabby Grosso, and you won't be able to see or hear her throughout today's trial, but she'll be assisting with the technological portion of the proceedings.
Thank you. Do we have any housekeeping matters, or are we going straight into opening statements?
The prosecution just has one, Your Honor. We'd like to direct your attention to a pretrial evidentiary ruling that says exhibits 4 through 33 are pre-admitted and may be referenced at any time, even opening statements.
Is that your understanding, defense?
Yes, Your Honor, it is.
And anything else?
No, Your Honor. With that, we're ready to proceed.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor, we would like to invoke Rule 615 and could at this time constructively sequester all witnesses.
Granted.
And we would also ask that witnesses be constructively sworn, excuse me.
Yes, ma'am. Is your defendant included in the sequestration?
No, Your Honor, she isn't. You won't be able to see or hear her throughout today's trial, but she's sitting at the virtual counsel table.
Sounds great. Anything else?
Yes, Your Honor, we would ask as to your preference of sharing screen. If you'd like us to ask prior to sharing our screen, or if we can simply do so throughout exams and opening and closing.
Let's ask. You don't have to ask during opening or closing, but when you're working with witnesses, let's make sure we ask before we show the jury anything.
Yes, Your Honor. With that, the defense is ready to proceed.
All right, we will now hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should now make sure that they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. And attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. So go ahead first with the prosecution.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, members of the jury, may it please the court. Let me run the park my way or I'm going to kill you. Those are the words of the defendant. She made that threat to her husband, and she was as good as her word. She killed him. That's why we're here today. Now, I want to introduce you to the defendant in today's case, Kara Bassett. She and her husband, Don Clark, ran as kind of zoo together, an elephant park where they raised elephants. But you're going to learn that the defendant hated the way those elephants were being treated. They were kept locked up in cramped cages, as you can see in a picture that just appeared, and they were exploited for public amusement. She asked her husband again and again to change the way he ran the park, but again and again he said no. So one night, in late August of 2017, she took a syringe of carfentanil, a lethal elephant tranquilizer strong enough to kill you or me or Don Clark, and injected it into him. Then she loaded his body into the trunk of his car, into her car, and drove 140 miles away to Big Gum Swamp, where she dumped his body. That's the big picture. There are three more specific pieces of evidence that I want you to look out for today that are going to prove Kara Bassett's guilt. First, what the defendant said. Second, what she did. And third, what she didn't do. Let's run through each of those one by one, starting with what she said. You're going to hear from Agent Brandon, and he's going to tell you about a petition for a restraining order filed by Don Clark. And on that restraining order, Don Clark detailed the threats his wife, Kara Bassett, was making against him, and that threat in particular. Let me run the park my way, or I'm gonna kill you. Second, you're going to learn about what the defendant did. Agent Branham is going to tell you about carfentanil, that elephant tranquilizer that I told you about earlier. And he's going to tell you that on the night Kara Bassett disappeared, Don Clark disappeared, one of those syringes is missing. He'll also tell you about forensic evidence, mud on the boots of Kara Bassett, linking her to the scene where Don Clark's body was destroyed. Third, you'll hear about what the defendant didn't do. You'll hear that in the entire week after her husband's disappearance, the defendant never once tried to call him. She never tried to text him. In that whole week, she never once tried to call the police. You'll see that she didn't need to, because she knew exactly where her husband was, because she was the one who put him there. Now, as the prosecution, we bear the burden of proof in today's case. We have to prove that Kara Bassett killed her husband beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest burden in our legal system. But that's a burden we fully intend to meet, because you're going to see what the defendant said. You're going to see what she did, and you're going to see what she didn't do. And you're going to see that she was as good as her word when she told her husband, "Let me run the park my way, or I'm going to kill you." For that reason, at the end of today's trial, we're going to ask you to find Kara Bassett guilty of murder. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Do we have an opening statement for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Members of the jury, what do we know about Don Clark? You know him, you've seen him in the news. Zoo owner, millionaire, amateur pilot. loving husband. That's who Mr. Clark was, not just some victim like the prosecution has painted him to be. Members of the jury, my name is Talia Vukotich, representing Ms. Kara Bassett. Today, the prosecution has charged my client with the murder of her husband. To meet their burden, they must prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, they will be unable to do this. They will not meet that burden because rushes to judgment never yield justice. Now, opposing counsel just told you how he was going to call Special Agent Steph Branham, how Agent Branham will lay out how she came to the conclusion to arrest Miss Bassett. But members of the jury, you'll hear how some things were missing in that investigation. Throughout today's trial, I want you to ask yourselves 3 questions about that investigation. 1, who didn't the FBI interview? 2, what evidence didn't they collect? And 3, where is the body? Now, we will call filmmaker Joe Young to try and help answer some of these questions. Mr. Young will explain how he spent 2 years religiously documenting the lives of Dawn and Kara. He will describe what he saw of the FBI's investigation and how it was incomplete. He will tell you how he conducted his own search for Mr. Clark and found evidence that Mr. Clark is still alive. Members of the jury, Ms. Bassett is not guilty of the crimes brought against her, and that will become abundantly clear throughout today's trial. The FBI simply didn't do their job. Now, we're not saying they consciously disregarded evidence or that they intentionally targeted my client. They just got it wrong. Innocent people get convicted of crimes they didn't do all the time. Members of the jury, we know that happens. Innocent convictions happen because of the investigation, like the one you're about to hear about. Rushes to judgment never yield justice. Members of the jury, I ask you not to make this same mistake the police did. Do not rush to judgment because that will not yield justice for Mr. Clark. At the end of today's trial, I will stand before you and ask you to find Miss Kara Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay, before the government calls its first witness, I'm going to ask everybody to switch back into gallery view. So again, that button is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and this will allow you to see the attorneys and the witnesses at the same time. So whenever you're ready, Counselor, you can call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Agent Steph Branham to the stand. May we proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon, Agent Branham. Could you introduce yourself to the court?
Good afternoon. My name's Special Agent Steph Branham.
And what do you do for work?
Well, like I said, I'm a senior special agent at the FBI office in Jacksonville, Florida.
Agent Branham, how do you know the defendant in today's case, Kara Bassett?
Ms. Bassett was our primary suspect in the investigation into the disappearance of her husband, Don Clark. We charged Ms. Bassett with murder in September of 2018.
I want to start a little bit further back than when you arrested her. Did you ever get to interview the defendant?
Yes, we interviewed the defendant on multiple occasions.
And were you able to learn anything about the business relationship Kara Bassett had with Don Clark?
Well, Don was the owner of that elephant park, but Kara also helped him manage it from time to time.
Did their management ever cause disagreements between the two of them?
That's what Ms. Bassett told us. She told us that she wanted to run it more like an activism, like a sanctuary type thing, but her husband sort of was running it like a zoo, she said, more like a business.
And did Kara Bassett tell you how that made her feel?
She said that some of the things Dawn was doing with the elephants made her furious.
And now, in those disagreements, do you know who was the one who had the final say?
Based on what we learned about the park and the legal side of everything, we learned that Don Clark was the one with the final say. He was the legal owner of the park.
Agent Branham, I'd like to switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
When did your investigation into the disappearance of Don Clark actually begin?
Well, we got a call from Miss Bassett reporting her husband missing on August 25th, but we later learned that that was actually a week after he disappeared.
How do you start your investigation?
Well, we started by taking a look around that elephant park.
And what do you find?
We found that there was a missing item from that elephant park. It was an elephant tranquilizer.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation as to how this witness would know something was missing.
Response?
Your Honor, if I may be heard, I believe this witness is about to get there, and as he is an expert witness in this field, he is allowed to give his opinions before laying the foundation for those opinions.
You have response?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel hasn't tendered Agent Branham as an expert in the field of FBI investigative work. Therefore, we cannot consider him one yet. And similarly, we would ask that he state his methods before stating his conclusions.
May I
Counsel,
respond?
qualify this expert as, or this witness as an expert?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I think you cut out for a second.
Pardon, are you trying to qualify this witness as an expert?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so you would be entering this then as an expert opinion?
Yes.
Okay, counsel, do you have a response on those grounds?
Yes, Your Honor. The foundation hasn't been laid that Agent Branham is an expert in the field of investigative work. We haven't heard about any of his previous cases, any of his successes or failures in the field of investigative work, nor his qualifications.
I agree. And the grounds of the objection, I'm going to sustain it. I'm going to strike it. And if you wish to lay foundation to qualify this witness as an expert, you're welcome to do so at this time.
Yes, Your Honor. Agent Branham, before we talk about your investigation, I'd like to go back a little bit. When did you enter the FBI?
Oh gosh, I entered the FBI back in 2002. I received the basic training that all FBI agents are required to undergo at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia.
And have you received any awards for your work in the FBI?
Yes, I was actually fortunate enough to receive the FBI award for merititious achievement for some work in a missing persons case I did last year.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we'd like to enter Agent Branham in as an expert in FBI investigative work.
It's my understanding that you don't need to enter him as an expert. When or if he chooses to enter expert testimony, we can object on the grounds of 702. So why don't you just proceed with your line of questioning, and then if there are any issues about his testimony, we can go through his qualifications.
Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to go back to the investigation. You were telling us that something was wrong when you investigated the park. Could you tell us more about that?
Of course. So we were able to review a logbook that the park kept of a certain elephant tranquilizer.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to project that logbook. Is that all right with you?
What's the exhibit number?
The exhibit number, I believe, I know it's in the 4 through 33 range. It's pre-admitted.
Okay, let's go ahead and move it into evidence first, and then you can project it to the jury.
All right, at this time, we'd like to move exhibit, I believe it's 18, into evidence.
Any objections?
Your Honor, pursuant to evidentiary ruling number 7, this has already been entered into evidence.
Perfect, then you may project it.
All right, could you tell us what we're looking at right now, Agent Branham?
Yes, on the left, that's one of the carfentanil tranquilizers, that the elephant tranks that we recovered. On the right, it looks like a copy of the log that they kept.
Now, based on that logbook, how many syringes did you expect to find at the park?
It said that after August 1st, there were 24 remaining. So that's how many we believe would be there.
And how many did you actually find?
We found 23 tranquilizers on site.
Do you know who was the last person to use the carfentanil?
Like it showed on that log there, it was Kara Clark, now Kara Bassett.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, although this log may be entered into evidence and he can say that according to the log, that's the last person who used the carfentanil, it's speculatory because Agent Branham doesn't know for certain if this log is accurate and who was the last person to use it.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
You may.
The logbook says that the last person to use the carfentanil had the initials CC. Whether or not somebody could have used it afterwards is a topic for cross-examination. My witness properly qualified his opinion by basing it on what the logbook says, and therefore it's in his rationally based perception and not speculation.
Any response?
Your Honor, I stand by my response that that Agent Branham cannot testify with certainty who was the last one to use it. He can testify according to the logbook who was the last person to use it, but he has no personal knowledge.
Okay, let's restrict his testimony to the fact that the logbook indicates that Carol, was it Clark, was the last person to use it, and then you're also free to go into the weight of that testimony on cross-examination. So sustained in part and overruled in part.
Agent Branham, I'd just like to make sure this is clear for the record. Based on this logbook, who was the last person to use the carfentanil?
The logbook told us that the last person was Miss Clark, now Miss Bassett, the defendant.
All right, Agent Branham. And what was the next step of your investigation?
Well, we decided to look for more evidence, and Miss Bassett actually reported us that she'd found Don Clark's car at their airport hangar in the Cary Belleone Airport.
Oh, Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to enter Exhibit 26 into evidence, Don Clark's van.
Any objection?
Your Honor, this has already been entered into evidence pursuant to evidentiary ruling 7.
Then you're free to project it.
Well, what information did you recover from that van, Agent Branham?
We were actually able to uncover the GPS records for that van.
And did the GPS data help you reconstruct what happened the night of Don Clark's disappearance?
Well, of course, the GPS records showed where that car was on the night he disappeared.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to enter the GPS data into evidence as well.
Is this another one of the pre-entered exhibits?
It is, yeah. All right. Could you walk us through the events of that night using the GPS data? When did the van leave the Elephant Park?
Like it says on that map there, the van left at 11:17 p.m.
And do you know when it arrived at Big Gum Swamp?
Not at the exact time. It arrived at around 1 a.m., I believe. At 1:26.
And do you know how long the car stayed at Big Gum Swamp?
It was there for around 30, 40 minutes.
Now, what did the car or the van do after leaving Big Gum Swamp?
We learned that it drove 132 miles back west to the Cary Belleone Airport.
I want to rewind for a second.
All right.
Do you have any theories about what was going on between the 1:26 a.m. and 2:10 a.m. timeline?
At the end of the investigation, it was our theory that that was the time in which the defendant was dumping Mr. Clark's body into that swamp.
Objection, Your Honor, lack of foundation, speculation.
Response?
Your Honor, I believe we qualified this witness as an expert. If that's being challenged at the moment, then we can discuss that. But as we discussed, we're about to go into the foundation for that opinion now.
Okay. I don't believe that the objection is to an improper expert opinion. If I'm understanding you correctly, I believe the objection is to lack foundation as to where the theory that the body was being dumped at this time came into play. And I'm going to sustain that objection unless you can lay some foundation about how he would have any reason to believe that a body was being dumped at this time.
Yes.
Stricken.
Agent Branham, I want to talk about how you formed that opinion.
Okay.
Do you have any evidence that Kara Bassett was at Big Gum Swamp that night?
Yes, we were able to recover some algae samples during the course of our investigation.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to enter both pictures of the boots and a forensic report into evidence.
You're welcome to project them that they're both under that exhibit umbrella.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, you told us that you found some forensic evidence. Could you tell us what exactly we're looking at now?
Of course. On the left there, you have boots that we recovered from Miss Bassett. On the right, we have the forensic report.
And what does the forensic report say?
Of course. So the forensic report found samples of algae on Miss Bassett's boots in that car that we talked about earlier, as well as on a wheelchair recovered from the park. We determined that that algae was a match for some algae from the Big Gum Swamp.
Agent Branham, I want to talk about what happened in the week after Don Clark disappeared, but before you got involved in your investigation. Now, you reviewed call logs. Did you review call logs in the course of your investigation?
Yes, we reviewed both Miss Bassett's and her husband's call logs.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to enter those call logs into evidence.
You may.
In the week after her husband's disappearance, did Kara Bassett ever try calling him?
Based on those phone records, we didn't see any calls to her husband.
And in the week after her husband's disappearance, did Kara Bassett ever try texting her husband?
Those call logs didn't reflect any text.
I'm sorry, I heard somebody speak. Was
Yes,
there?
Your Honor, I objected speculation as to what Miss Bassett tried to do.
Okay, sorry, yeah, it must have cut out. Could you please elaborate, Counselor?
Yes. Agent Branham said that Miss Bassett tried, he didn't know if Miss Bassett tried to text or that she didn't try to text. We don't know what Miss Bassett tried to do. All we can look at is if she did or didn't, which we can see on the phone records.
Response?
Your Honor, as to whether or not Kara Bassett may have tried to text her husband, I believe that's something that we would have seen on the phone records. Once again, this is an opinion that is being qualified by the evidence that Agent Branham reviewed and is as such quite appropriate.
Because the agent has consistently said based off of the call record, I'm going to permit it at this time, but we'll definitely make sure to keep it in the realm of what we can actually learn from this call log and nothing outside of it. So I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So based on these call logs, Agent Branham, did Kara Bassett ever try texting her husband in that entire week after her husband disappeared?
Based on those logs, no.
And did Kara Bassett ever try calling you or the police in that timeline?
To my knowledge, the only time the authorities were notified about this was a week after her husband's disappearance on August 25th.
Agent Branham, were you ever able to uncover a motive for Kara Bassett?
We recovered some documents that led us to a theory. One of those documents was a petition for a restraining order.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to admit Exhibit 34 into evidence.
Your Honor, opposing counsel's time has officially expired.
Okay, and I presume that your procedure is that the examination must end at this point?
I believe that's the case, Your Honor. May I confirm with my second chair?
You may.
Your Honor, just to elaborate, I've gotten this information from my second chair. I'm not timing it myself.
Okay. Is the bailiff here?
Yes, Your Honor, but I'm also not a timer. It's the second chairs who are timing, so let's confirm that with the second chairs.
It looks like that is correct. My time has expired.
All right, then we will go ahead and move into cross-examination at this time.
Yes, Your Honor. One moment. May I proceed?
You may.
Agent Branham, is it your conclusion that the defendant drove the company van to the company airport?
My apologies, ma'am. I didn't catch that.
Yes, of course. Is it your conclusion that Miss Bassett drove the van to the airport?
We believe that that van was driven to that Big Gum Swamp and then to the Cary Belleon Airport.
So the van was found at the airport, right? Not at the park?
Not the park. It was found at the airport. That's right.
Agent Branham, you have no explanation as to how Miss Bassett got home that night, do you?
We don't know how she got home. We know that that airport was about 10 minutes from her house.
You didn't include any way that she got home that night or how she transported the wheelchair home that night, right?
That's right, ma'am.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation. We haven't heard anything about a wheelchair.
Response, Counselor?
Your Honor, excuse me, I thought that opposing counsel had brought it up when he was discussing the algae. I could be wrong, in which case I would just strike that part of my question.
All right, I don't recall hearing anything about a wheelchair, so if you want to lay the foundation and proceed with testimony, you're more than welcome to.
Your Honor, I'd just like to clarify that my Agent Brenham's answer to the entire part of the question stands, except for any portion said about the wheelchair.
That's fine, and you're welcome to go into testimony about the wheelchair. You'll just need to lay independent foundation.
Of course, Your Honor. Now, I'd like to talk about who you interviewed in today's case.
Okay.
You claim you interviewed all relevant people, right?
We tried to, ma'am. That's right.
You were aware that someone named Kelsey Stebbins had access to elephant tranquilizers?
That's right. There were a couple of park staff members that had access.
Excuse me, Your Honor, I forgot to ask permission. May Ms. Grosso share what has already been entered into evidence?
You may.
Now, Agent Brenham, it's true that Ms. Stebbins' fingerprints were found inside of that van you mentioned?
That's right.
Yet you never interviewed her?
No, we did not interview Miss Stebbins.
Now, I'd like to talk about Lisa Clark. Do you know who that is?
Yes, we learned in the course of our investigation that Lisa was Dawn's ex-wife.
And you never recovered an alibi for Lisa, did you?
That's right. Lisa refused to speak to us at any length.
Now, Ms. Grosso is showing you what has already been entered into evidence as Exhibit 4. Do you know what this is?
Yes, that's a letter we received from Dawn Clark's attorney.
Now, can you read the line that she has highlighted?
Oh gosh, let me zoom. Oh, there it is. Yes, my apologies. My eyes aren't too good. She was prone to outbursts and threats in person, by phone, and by text.
And this is referring to Mr. Clark's ex-wife, Lisa, right?
That's right.
Now, according to this letter, Mr. Clark was planning on transferring large sums of money to Costa Rica, correct?
Yes, some offshore accounts, I believe.
And on the night Mr. Clark went missing, he received a message from an unlisted number in Costa Rica. Is that right?
That's right. It was at 6 p.m.
And just moments after, he called that number.
That's what those records reflected, yes.
Through the course of your investigation, Agent Branham, you never interviewed this person, did you?
Unfortunately, we couldn't determine who that person was, so you're right, we didn't interview him.
Now, with the exception of the police, you never interviewed anyone from Costa Rica, is that right?
That's right. We spoke to local Costa Rican police, but we didn't speak to any other individuals in Costa Rica.
You just took their word for it?
Yes, we believed the investigators from Costa Rica had done a thorough job.
Now, I'd like to talk about the evidence you collected.
Okay.
You never collected any physical evidence from Costa Rica, correct?
From Costa Rica, no.
Despite Mr. Clark having a house there?
Yes, that's right.
You never collected any algae from inside any elephant enclosures, did you?
Are you talking about from the elephant park?
Yes, sir.
That's right. We didn't test any algae from those parks.
You never collected any algae from swamps within 150 miles of the elephant park, did you?
That's right. We tested the 3 items we collected from the park and the big gum swamp.
And it's true that you can't tell us the samples that you collected from the park. You can't tell us when that algae got there, right?
That's right. Forensics can't tell us that.
And forensics can't tell us how long it was there.
That's right, ma'am. We don't know.
It's true that algae like that can be transferred contact to contact. Is that right?
Yes, that's how the algae
Your
works.
Honor,
Oh.
outside the scope of this witness's expertise.
Response?
Your Honor, this is included in Exhibit 5, which has already been entered into evidence. I'm simply asking him to restate these.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Okay.
If it's based on the exhibit, then I ask that it be qualified as such. I don't believe that my witness actually was the one who did the forensic testing, and if he's being asked to quote parts of that document, I ask that it be stated explicitly.
I'm going to go ahead and overrule the objection. If he doesn't know something, he's more than free to say that he isn't qualified to answer the question.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Agent Branham, just to confirm, it's true that algae can be transferred from contact to contact, right?
That's right. That's what our analyst informed me.
And when you did your investigation, you learned that The park was really busy the week after Mr. Clark disappeared.
That's right.
And you collected the algae. Mr. Clark went missing on the 18th of August,
That's right.
and you collected the algae samples 14 days later.
That's right. We didn't start our investigation until a week after.
Now, it's true that Miss Bassett tried to help your investigation, correct?
Yeah, she sat down with us a couple of times.
Well, she cooperated with you every step of the way.
That's right. She answered our questions.
Now, it's true that Miss Bassett went looking for him the week that he was missing before she called the police.
That's what she told us. We weren't able to verify whether or not she did.
Well, you weren't able to verify it because you never checked, right, Agent Branham?
No, we went off her cell records, which placed her at the home.
So you never corroborated Miss Bassett's claims that she did go looking for her husband?
No, we were not able to corroborate those claims.
Now, Agent Branham, you didn't actively go try to corroborate those claims, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, it's true that you never collected an empty syringe with Miss Bassett's fingerprints on it?
No, nothing like that, ma'am.
You never collected an empty syringe at all?
No, again, that syringe was missing.
Now, it's true, let's talk about Mr. Clark's body.
Okay.
You and your team did a good investigation of the swamp, right?
I'd like to think so.
And you trained dogs to search for Mr. Clark's scent?
Yeah, we had some canines out there with us.
You and the FBI did the best job you could under the circumstances, correct?
I'd like to believe so. It was a pretty big swamp, but yeah, we did our best.
Yet you found no body.
That's right. We were unable to find the body in our search.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
And I presume with the time restrictions, there will be no redirect from the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. May my witness be excused?
He may be.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else from the prosecution?
No, Your Honor. The prosecution rests.
Defense, do you have any witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Joe Young. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good afternoon, Mr. Young, excuse me. Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Young, and I'm a film producer.
And how are you involved in today's case?
You know, I worked for Kara Bassett. I knew Don Clark, and I conducted my own investigation to see where Don was.
And how often are you at the park?
I was at the park 5 days a week, 10 hours a day, filming Miss Bassett's every move.
Now, you mentioned you knew Mr. Clark. Did you know someone named Lisa Clark?
I did. Don's ex-wife, Lisa Clark, I saw her yell at him a few times.
Now, do you remember what she yelled any of those times?
One time she yelled, "I'll wipe you off the face of the earth." And another time, "You'll be sorry."
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor, this falls under 8033, then existing state of mind, which we can use to show motive and intent.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
I believe these statements do not fall under 8033. 8033 more has to do with statements describing a current condition or a current situation, not statements that are the likes of which Lisa Clark was saying that Joe Young overheard.
Any response?
Your Honor, the exact verbiage from 8033 says, a statement of the declarant's then existing state of mind, such as motive, intent, or plan, which we are using it for intent and plan, Your Honor.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, the situation of 8033 has more to do with statements that are a plan but have to do with the current situation around it. I plan to do this. That's not what's going on here. This is a threat made by Lisa Clark and does not fall under 8033.
I'm inclined to agree with the prosecution that this does not describe a then existing state of mind, but if you can lay more foundation that that was her existing plan, motive, or intent, we can rehear it, but for now I'm going to sustain it and strike it.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Young, when Lisa Clark came to the park, how was she acting?
She just seemed, from my perspective, it just looked like she was, sort of aggressive to Don Clark. And like I said, she said those statements to him.
Do you know if Mr. Clark and Miss Clark had been fighting?
I really don't know if they had been fighting. It just seemed that way whenever I saw her at the park.
Now, do you remember anything that she said to Mr. Clark?
Well, she said that she would wipe him off the face of the earth.
Objection, Your Honor. I renew my objection.
Response?
Your Honor, I'm no longer using 8033, but 8032, which is excited utterance. I've just laid the foundation that Miss Clark, when she was at the park, was in arguments with Mr. Clark and was appearing angry. That's the qualification for an excited utterance.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Excited utterance is an exception for situations where somebody doesn't have enough time to think of a reason to lie or to think of a lie itself. That's not what's going on here. He's not saying ouch or I'm scared. Lisa Clark was threatening somebody else. That's not an excited utterance.
I'm inclined to agree that this doesn't fall under the excited utterance, but I do feel like the foundation has now made it admissible under 8033. So I'm going to allow it in as a then existing state of mind, since we've now heard the foundation that it occurred during the course of an argument. So I'm going to let the statement in.
Now, Mr. Young, do you remember the last time that you interacted with Mr. Clark?
On August 18th, that was the last day I saw him.
And without telling us what Mr. Clark said, do you remember what the conversation was about?
Right, I was talking to him. I was telling him about my trip to Mexico. Right when I was getting to the good part of the story, it looked like he looked down. He got like a phone call or something. But it was weird because he got the call and his face just turned white, like he'd seen a ghost or something.
Now, what happened after that?
Well, he walked away. I never saw him again.
Now, Mr. Young, do you remember Miss Bassett's demeanor on August 18th, 2017?
Yeah, on August 18th, Kara was just acting normal.
And what does normal mean?
She was working at the park, in the elephant enclosures like she did every day.
Now, Your Honor, permission for my second chair to share her screen with what's already been entered into evidence. Excuse me, Exhibit 22.
Yes, you may.
Now, Mr. Young, do you know what this is?
This looks like Kara's phone records. I saw this in an interview I did.
Now, according to these phone records, where was Miss Bassett all night?
It looks like on August 18th, it looks like she was in Tallahassee for 168 hours.
And just to clarify, where does Miss Bassett live?
Tallahassee, Florida.
Now, I'd like to move on to the FBI investigation. You mentioned you were there for about 3 years. So were you there for the FBI investigation?
Yeah, right when I got back, I was there, and the Elephant Park was just filled with FBI agents looking through everything.
And did they interview you?
They did, but they barely asked me anything.
Did you see them interview anyone else?
I saw them interview a couple people, but I never saw them interview Nate Garson or Kelsey Stebbins.
Did you interview either Nate Garson or Kelsey Stebbins?
I was able to sit down with Kelsey Stebbins, and I interviewed her.
Now, you mentioned that you were making a documentary. Did you have footage of Miss Bassett and Mr. Clark?
Yeah, over the time I was there, I got about at least 2,000 hours of footage.
So did you turn that over to the FBI?
The FBI never asked for it. You know, I'm still waiting for my phone to ring.
Now, did you ever see the FBI handle evidence at the park?
Yeah, like I said, when I came back from my trip, I saw them in the storage facility. They were handling some of the tranquilizers that the elephant park has there.
And did you see them handling this? Did you see them using gloves while handling these tranquilizers?
The agent I saw didn't have gloves on.
Now, Your Honor, permission for Ms. Grosso to share her screen with the elephant tranquilizer log that's already been entered into evidence.
You may.
Now, Mr. Young, do you know what this is?
Yeah, this is the log that Kara had the park use to log a record of all the tranquilizers.
Do you know when people would use this log?
Anytime, to my knowledge, anytime they would take a tranquilizer out, they would mark it here on the log.
Now, to your knowledge, who had access to the tranquilizers?
There was about a dozen people that had keys to the storage facility. I only knew a few of them, though.
Do you remember any of their names?
Well, I know Kara. I know some of the elephant park people, like I mentioned, Nate Garson, Kelsey Stebbins.
Now, you mentioned that you did your own investigation, Mr. Young. Why did you conduct an investigation?
I wanted to find Don. I didn't think he was dead.
So where did you look for him?
Well, in 2018, I took a trip out to Costa Rica to try and find him.
Why did you look for him in Costa Rica?
You know, I knew Don pretty well, and I remember that he had a place in Hermosa Beach, Costa Rica. So I went out there.
And what consisted of your investigation?
You know, I searched Don's house. You know, I snuck in through one of his windows, and, you know, I just looked around to see if I could find him or anything that, you know, indicated that he was there.
So did you find anything that indicated Mr. Clark was there?
You know, from what I saw, I got in there and there was a fan on. I went into Don's closet and he had clothes there. I mean, I saw his Berkeley sweatshirt in the closet, and, you know, I was just looking around and I didn't see any dust anywhere. It was spotless.
When did you conduct this search, Mr. Young?
This was in 2018.
And while you were searching, did you find Mr. Clark?
I didn't find Mr. Clark, no, but I found what I just told you.
To this day, Mr. Young, do you know where your friend Don is?
No, I've looked for him, but I haven't seen him.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Young, thank you for being with us today. I'd like to begin by talking about your business relationship with the defendant. Now, you get paid by Kara Bassett, correct?
I have been paid by Kara Bassett, yes.
You started getting paid in August 2015, right?
That's right.
And you kept getting paid until September 2018, right?
That is true.
And for that entire duration, you were getting paid $5,000 a month, right?
A month, yes.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you were paid for 37 months, right?
I'll trust your math on that.
And that means that total, you made $185,000 from your relationship with the defendant, right?
Sounds about right.
But she could be paying you a lot more too, couldn't she?
Should be paying me a lot more.
Response?
Your Honor, I'm not asking about I'm asking about a potential situation that we know could happen in the future. I'm not asking about a previous situation saying, you know, she could be paying more.
Yeah, I don't believe this is going to Miss Bassett's state of mind, so I'm going to overrule it at this point.
Mr. Young, Miss Bassett could be paying you a lot more in the future, right?
If you mean when we finally get our documentary on the screen, yeah.
That's right. When you finally get your documentary on the screen, she's going to be paying you 20% of whatever that makes, right?
Right. Going into it, I knew I'd be getting 20% of whatever we make.
And right now, there's a $10 million deal on the table, correct?
That is true.
That means the defendant could be paying you $2 million, right?
That would be my cut. That is true.
Now, on direct examination, you talked about exhibits that were shown to you during an interview you had, right?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to project Exhibit 34 and ask that it be admitted into evidence.
Any objections?
Yes, Your Honor, I have multiple objections to this document, hearsay, improper character evidence, and 403 more prejudicial than probative.
Okay, give me one moment to pull that document up. And can you walk me through your objections while it loads?
Yes, Your Honor. First, with hearsay, it's I'm objecting 805. It's double hearsay. There's two parts of this document. We're objecting both are hearsay. They're both statements out of court being used for the truth of the matter. Would you like me to just address hearsay or each of the objections?
Briefly, this is Exhibit 34, the ex parte petition.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to let Counselor respond to the hearsay objection first, and then we'll move to the next one.
Yes, Your Honor. Under Rule 807, if documents have a circumstantial guarantee of trustworthiness, then they're excluded from the rule against hearsay. This document, as you can see, was signed under the penalties of perjury. That makes it about as good as an affidavit, and therefore is excluded against the rule against hearsay.
Any response on those grounds?
Yes, Your Honor. This document was denied. It wasn't filled out correctly. Therefore, we cannot use the 807 exception.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
Just because the document was denied doesn't mean Don Clark didn't believe that he had to fill out the document truthfully, given that he acknowledged it was signed under the penalties of perjury. That means that it meets that circumstantial guarantee of trustworthiness and should be admitted to evidence.
Okay, I'm going to hold off on that for a second, and I'll hear your next objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Improper character evidence. The statements made by Mr. Clark about Ms. Bassett are improper character. Opposing counsel is using this document to show that because Ms. Bassett acted one way in this occasion, that she'd be more likely to act the same way in another occasion, which is inadmissible.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
We're not using this document for its prohibited 404A purpose. We're using it for its allowed 404B purpose, that it shows a motive for the defendant to kill her husband.
Okay, so my understanding of this document is that it's an attempt to get a restraining order, and you're telling me you're not using it to show a propensity for violence.
No, Your Honor, we're not. We're actually using it for both the quote and the fact that it shows threats on it. That shows both intent and motive. We will never discuss, or we can if it's Your Honor's liking, the fact that it was a restraining order.
Okay, so the quotes I will redact and allow in because it's your defendant. The rest of it I'm going to strike under character evidence because it definitely demonstrates a propensity, and I don't believe there's a way to admit it without the undue prejudice of the jury interpreting it as such. So feel free to use the quotes on the document. Those will be admitted because they're made by the defendant, but everything else is going to be stricken.
Your Honor, I would ask to clarify, this is the quotes made by Ms. Bassett, not by Mr. Clark?
Correct. The quotes made by Miss Bassett. The
Yes.
ones in quotations, yes.
My apologies, Your Honor. I don't believe we have a slide that only shows the quote right now. If it's all right with you, would it be okay for the jury to mentally redact the rest of the document?
Counselor, are you okay with that for the efficiency of trial? If not, I'm happy to just have the witness testify to it.
Your Honor, I would ask for the witness just to be able to testify to it as to avoid showing inadmissible evidence to the jury pursuant to 103.
All right, then we are going to go ahead and strike the document. We're not going to project any of the document to the jury because everything else has been redacted out. He is free to testify to the statements that have been admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, you saw that petition for a restraining order, right, Mr. Young?
During my interview before trial, I did see that petition.
And during that interview, you learned that Kara Bassett told her husband, "Let me run the park my way or I'm going to kill you."
I believe that's what it says, if I recall everything correctly.
Now, on direct examination, you said that you visited Costa Rica, right?
I did.
You visited Don Clark's house, correct?
I snuck into his house.
But Mr. Young, no one was home when you visited, correct?
No one was there, no.
The fridge was empty.
The fridge was empty.
The lights were off.
I did notice that the lights were off.
There were no toiletries in the bathroom, right?
Nope.
And for the entire week you watched that house, you didn't see anyone come or go, right?
From what I could see, I did not see anyone come or go into the house.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about what you saw between Kara Bassett and Don Clark. Now, you saw them fight a few times, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, inadmissible character evidence. Nowhere have I brought up any good character between the defendant and, between my client and Mr. Clark.
Your Honor, have you heard?
Pardon, Counselor. Could you specify which statement you're objecting to?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm objecting to the question that that would call for inadmissible characters, asking about if Miss Bassett and Mr. Clark had frequently fought. On direct examination, I didn't bring up any statements about them having a good relationship. Therefore, it's inadmissible.
Response, Counselor.
Your Honor, again, we're not using this for 404A for showing any propensity or character trait. We're using it to show that the defendant would have a motive.
I'm again going to sustain this as character evidence. The regular couples fighting doesn't necessarily meet the bar for motive, but it will demonstrate to the jury propensity for some sort of violent or aggressive character trait. So it's stricken under those grounds.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Young, you know that Kara Bassett and Don Clark disagreed about how to run the park, correct?
I was aware of that.
You know that Kara Bassett, she wanted to run the park like a cause, right?
Like a sanctuary.
And Don Clark, he didn't want to run it like a sanctuary. He wanted to run it like a business, correct?
That was my understanding. He wanted to keep it as a zoo.
Ms. Van, at this time, Your Honor, we'd like to introduce exhibit, I believe it's 38 into evidence, a video of Kara Bassett.
Any objections, Counselor?
Your Honor, I would ask for permission for this to be constructively played outside the earshot of the jury so that I can see if I would object. There's multiple videos, and I'd like to ensure that I have the possibility to object.
That's fine. Let's see it really quickly because I also need to see it before I can rule.
People look at me and they think I'm sweet and nice. Go on. Keep underestimating me. I will lobby senators. I will protest big businesses. I will get in your face. I will take people to their grave if I have to. I will do anything to protect these elephants.
Any objections at this time, Counselor?
Yes, Your Honor, I object inadmissible character evidence and more prejudicial than probative.
Response?
Your Honor, as to the 404A, now we're not talking about fights or anything that shows a propensity to commit violence, besides the fact that she's telling the jury that she would do anything to protect her elephants. Also, this shows a clear-cut motive, which is explicitly permissible under 404B. As to the more prejudicial than probative, this video has substantial probative value. It's in the defendant's words, and it's her telling exactly what her motive was.
I agree. This is no longer an instance being used to demonstrate a character trait, so I'm going to allow this in. So this will be admitted and you're welcome to publish it to the jury.
Yes,
Ms.
Your Honor.
Vanderslice, oh,
Your Honor, I would just ask that for time's sake, that we just constructively now play it for the jury since they've just seen it.
Your objection and us viewing the document per your request was seen outside of the earshot of the jury. So for the sake of preserving the record, you can go ahead and present it now and then move on.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Vanderslice, could you play that video for us?
People look at me and they think I'm sweet and nice. Go on. Keep underestimating me. I will lobby senators. I will protest big businesses. I will get in your face. I will take people to their grave if I have to. I will do anything to protect these elephants.
Mr. Young, that clip ends with Kara Bassett saying that she would do anything to protect her elephants, correct?
That is true.
And just a few moments before, she said she would take people to their graves if she had to, right?
That's what I heard.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Brief redirect, Your Honor. I would first ask that my second chair put my time in the chat just so then everyone can know how much time I have. Thank you. May I proceed, Your Honor? Now, Mr. Young, opposing counsel brought up this money situation. Is it typical for you to get paid for your work?
Absolutely. We knew that I was going to get 20% from the beginning.
And was it unusual that you would make any money off of your client?
No, working with Kara 5 days a week, 10 hours a day, I mean, I had to get paid for my work.
Now, Mr. Young, opposing counsel brought up a quote by Ms. Bassett. Had you ever seen her say anything like that to Mr. Clark in person?
From what I could tell, or from what I had seen, I hadn't seen anything specifically like that, no.
And just to clarify, how often were you with Mr. Clark and Ms. Bassett?
I was at the Elephant Park 5 days a week, 10 hours a day from 2015 to 2018.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests.
Witnesses are excused. And we are now going to hear closing arguments for each party. So everyone please switch back into view. And since both witnesses have completed their testimony, you can go ahead now and complete the witness portion of your ballot for efficiency. And then we will move on to closing arguments. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll go ahead and move on. All right, we will go ahead now and move on to closing arguments. Prosecution, you may proceed whenever you are ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Let me run the park my way, or I'm going to kill you. Those are the words that define this case. Kara Bassett said that threat to her husband. He didn't give in, so she killed him. She was as good as her word. Now, at the beginning of this trial, I asked you to focus on three things. And I want to walk back through the evidence to see if we showed you what we said we'd show you. The first thing we said you'd see is what the defendant said. And you heard this from Joe Young. He told you that the defendant once threatened her husband, that she said, "Let me run the park my way or I'm going to kill you." Members of the jury, that's not a casual business dispute. You don't threaten to kill somebody over a casual business dispute. No. Kara Bassett gave her husband a very real ultimatum. Hand over the park or pay the price. And you heard in Kara Bassett's own words what that price was. Ms. Vanderslice, if you could play the clip, please.
I will take people to their grave if I have to. I will do anything to protect these elephants.
She would take people to their graves if she had to. That's what she said. So now let's talk about what she did. Agent Branham told you about carfentanil, and he showed you a logbook of the Tallahassee Elephant Park. He told you that that logbook had one extra syringe. A syringe was missing the very day Dawn Clark disappeared. One was unaccounted for. That was the murder weapon. Agent Branham also told you about GPS data he found in a van. GPS data that showed somebody drove Dawn Clark's van 139 miles in the middle of the night to Big Gum Swamp. And he told you about mud. Mud on the boots of Kara Bassett linking her to Big Gum Swamp. We're still waiting for an innocent reason. Someone drives almost 140 miles in the middle of the night to a swamp. You don't go there for the mosquitoes. You also saw last what the defendant didn't do. You heard that the defendant never once tried to call her husband in the week after he disappeared. She never once tried to text him. In that whole week, she didn't once try to call the police. I want you to think about that for a moment, members of the jury. If your spouse was missing for 24 hours, wouldn't you try to call them? Wouldn't you try to text them? If they were gone for 3 or 4 or 5 days, wouldn't you keep trying to call them? Wouldn't you call the police? Of course you would. Because that's what someone does when they don't know where their spouse is. But Kara Bassett did know where her spouse was. She knew where Dawn Clark was because she was the one who put him there. Now, we as the prosecution bore the burden of proof in today's case. And in a few moments, you're going to see a jury verdict form. And I want to walk through it to make sure it's clear. I don't want you to rush to judgment because I agree, rushing doesn't produce justice. So let's take this slowly. First, we, the prosecution, had to prove that Kara Bassett killed Dawn Clark. That's what you know from what she did and from what she didn't do. The forensic evidence ties her directly to the crime. It doesn't tie Lisa Clark to the crime. It doesn't tie Kelsey Stebbins. No, it ties Kara Bassett to the crime. That's the first thing we had to prove. The second thing we had to prove was that she did it with malice aforethought. That's just a fancy way of saying that she did it intentionally, that she meant to kill Dawn Clark. That's what you know from what she said. She gave her husband a real ultimatum. She threatened him. Let me run the park my way or I'm going to kill you. He didn't give in, and so she did. She killed him. That's why I'm going to ask you to check the box next to guilty. You can't let Kara Bassett get away. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Closing for the defense.
Yes, Your Honor, before I proceed, I would just ask for permission for my second to be able to share her screen freely throughout my closing.
Permission granted.
May I proceed?
You may.
Members of the jury, what do we know about Don Clark? Well, things have changed since we last spoke. We now know that Mr. Clark was an avid traveler that went to Costa Rica all the time. We now know that Mr. Clark's ex-wife was threatening him and he didn't have a great relationship with her. We now know that even Mr. Clark's great friend hasn't heard from him in 3 years. Mr. Clark is not just the victim in today's case. He is a real person, and members of the jury, I ask you to look at him as such. He was Miss Bassett's husband. And the prosecution has charged Miss Bassett with the murder of her husband, and they failed to meet their burden of proof. They failed because you saw today, the FBI rushed to judgment. And rushes to judgment never yield justice. Now, at the beginning of today's trial, I stood before you and I asked you to take note of 3 questions. 1, who didn't they interview? 2, what evidence didn't they collect? And 3, where's the body? Now, the answers to these questions hold all of the reasonable doubt in today's case. The FBI rushed to judgment. So let's look at what they rushed past. Who didn't the FBI interview? When Agent Branham took the stand today, he told you that he interviewed all people he deemed relevant. Well, now we know that's not true. Nate Garson and Kelsey Stebbins were never interviewed. We heard how Miss Stebbins, how her fingerprints were found inside the van, and we heard how Miss Stebbins and Mr. Garson had access to the elephant tranquilizers. The police never interviewed everyone with access to their alleged murder weapon. We heard that the FBI never interviewed anyone from Costa Rica, despite Mr. Clark's connections. We know the night Mr. Clark disappeared, he received a phone call from an unlisted number in Costa Rica. We don't know who that was. We don't know why they were calling, but what we do know is that Mr. Clark was planning on transferring large sums of money to offshore accounts. And what about his ex-wife, Lisa, who we know was prone to threats, who we know was prone to outbursts, who we know was constantly fighting with her ex-husband, who we know has no alibi. Now let's look at what evidence the FBI didn't collect. The prosecution's case hinges on algae samples from the elephant park perfectly matching algae samples from the Big Gump swamp. Yet the FBI never tested any algae from the elephant park. They never tested any algae from inside the elephant enclosures where Miss Bassett worked every single day. They didn't collect any algae from swamps within 150 miles. We don't know how that algae on the boots got there. We don't know when it got there. We know that it was 2 weeks until it was discovered by the FBI. It could have been from a number of places, but we'll never know because the FBI didn't check. You heard how Miss Bassett tried to help the investigation, how she tried looking for Mr. Clark, and how the FBI disregarded her claims, thereby missing possible evidence. They never found an empty syringe with Miss Bassett's fingerprints on it. They never found an empty syringe at all. They just assumed. Even though we know from Joe Young, at least a dozen people had access. We know 4 people by name. We don't know when that syringe went missing. We don't know who took it. We don't know how long it was missing until it was discovered gone. But what we do know is that the FBI were handling those tranquilizers without gloves. So now let's look at the final question. Where's the body? We don't even know if Mr. Clark is dead. Mr. Young went to his home in Costa Rica and found evidence he's still alive. But the FBI didn't know that because they didn't check. Maybe Mr. Clark ran away. Maybe that unlisted Costa Rican number took him. Maybe it was his ex-wife, Lisa, but we'll never know. Members of the jury, look at all of the assumptions that have to be made to convict my client. A, Mr. Clark is even dead. B, that his body has been hidden so well that it was never found. And 3, that he was killed with carfentanil and in no other possible manner. And if we assume those major 3 points, there's still tons of questions the prosecution simply cannot answer. Like, how did Miss Bassett get home that night? She walked at 4 a.m., 5 miles by herself? That's unreasonable. If you're not sure about what happened to Mr. Clark, you must acquit. If you're not sure about the algae, you must acquit. If you're not sure about the investigation, you must acquit. Furthermore, we don't have the burden of proof in today's case. We don't have to prove anything. That's their job, and they failed. Rushes to judgment never yield justice. So I ask you to take a step back and look at the larger picture here. There's reasonable doubt everywhere. Rushes to judgment never yield justice. Find Miss Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Do we do rebuttal in this jurisdiction, and if so?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed with rebuttal?
You may.
Members of the jury, you can't reward Kara Bassett for hiding her husband's body well. Now, in their closing argument, defense told you about a couple of suspects. But I want you to notice something. Not one of those suspects gained anything from Dawn Clark's death. Not one of those suspects has ever killed or ever told Dawn Clark that she would kill him. And not one of those suspects was the last person to check out the carfentanil at the logbook. But there is one person who answers yes to all of those questions. Kara Bassett. You don't have to assume Dawn Clark is dead. Joe Young told you that the entire time he was at Dawn Clark's house in Costa Rica, nobody came. Nobody. There were no toiletries in the house, nothing. It was vacant. Nobody's used his bank accounts, and nobody's accessed his cell phone. He's dead, members of the jury. And the defense, they told you that he wasn't just a victim, and that's what makes this crime so tragic. Dawn Clark was a father, he was a business owner, and he was a husband. But his wife, she threatened him and then carried out that threat. Find her guilty. Thank you.
Counselor? Okay, we're going to go ahead and give the judges a minute to finish up and submit their ballots. And once we have word that those are all in, they will give you brief comments and then we will let you all sign off.